Lily, I think that is the best gift I've ever brought you. Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. Well, you may have heard I went to Ireland for a meeting and I was instructed to come back with a gift. So, of course, who did I get a gift for? You know, it's Miss Lily got a very special Irish sweater. Very excited to see her. She's very excited to see me back with a sweater. I can't come back without, the gift. My grandson, I got him too, so just so you know, I'm not ignoring my grandchild. Also, lots of interesting things in the news. You know, my sister and everybody has been after me, like, when can we get the second booster? Because it's not yet approved, but the FDA has finally now agreed that people over the age of 65 who have immune compromised status are eligible now for a second booster. That should be sometime soon, hopefully. And then the FDA also amended its emergency use authorization so that the bivalent vaccine is really the only one that's available now for everyone. So they've gotten rid of the monovalent Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. So, to me, I'm a big fan of Rob Califf, director of the FDA, and I think Rochelle Walensky is doing a great job at the CDC. But I think this was a little slow. I mean, we should have had approval for the bivalent, and the monovalents don't work. And frankly, what we need is a trivalent vaccine, because the bivalent vaccine is not really that effective against XBB, the current dominant strain. And so what we really need is a trivalent, and I hope that that will be available in the fall. And I'm also hopeful that the NIH continues to fund and support research to find something that generates an IgA response, so it's more appropriate for preventing infection rather than just preventing serious illness and death. And a universal vaccine. So there's a lot of stuff to do, a lot more to go on with important science for coronaviruses. But I think we finally are moved on. We now are at the bivalent vaccine, but once again, we're kind of chasing. Omicron was in the winter. Now, it was perfect then, but now we have it approved now, and we're already on to the next variant. So we're kind of chasing our tails. As I look back on, what's the last 3 years of the pandemic, it's really kind of remarkable to me. If you look at the cumulative number of cases, these are reported cases, and we already know reported cases vastly underestimate. But there were over 762 million, almost 800 million reported cases. If you think of the world's population right now at about 8 billion, that's 10% of the world's population had confirmed cases. Now, what we have looked at over time is that the actual number of cases is probably fivefold that. So probably half the world's population at some point was infected with this coronavirus, and almost 7 million deaths. And what we now know, and I'm only showing you this because while the numbers look great for reported case numbers, they're really inaccurate. And the last 2 weeks I was giving you data on the number of Paxlovid prescriptions, and it's twice that number. And so case number is almost irrelevant to follow now. I think one of the things we have to learn coming out of the pandemic is reported cases are not going to be very accurate. Now, hospitalizations are still worth following because it gives you some indication of how seriously ill you get with the virus. That's called virulence. And the hospitalizations continue to fall. That's almost certainly a combination of the virus being less virulent as it sort of becomes more an upper airway infection instead of a pneumonia, and also people getting, more and more people in the world either having gotten the disease or Lily's rolling around on the floor. Look at that. You give her a sweater and the next thing you know, she's a diva. Anyway, it's a combination of either being immune, having some immunity because you got infected, or vaccinated. But, I was looking at the data for mortality versus vaccination status. And people say, well, the vaccine, how useful is that? Well, look, in the Omicron surge, it was almost a 15-fold increase in mortality. These are unvaccinated versus vaccinated. Now it's less so, but it's still about a 5 or 6-fold benefit for being vaccinated in terms of mortality. So if you haven't gotten your vaccine, please get vaccinated. And the problem is, if you look at the data for vaccination, only 70% of the population has been vaccinated, primary series of vaccination. That means 30% of the population still has not received the vaccine. I'm sure at least half of them have been infected, but still the vaccine is a good booster. And then if you look at the booster, only 17% of the population has gotten the bivalent booster. So we have a group of people, if they've been primarily infected, they were infected with either the original Wuhan isolate or maybe Omicron, but the circulating isolate now is XBB, and those two, Wuhan and the Omicron variants, are not all that protective against infection. And as the best indication now, because we can't follow case number, is wastewater analysis. And so the wastewater analysis, last week I reported 32% of the wastewater reports were increased. This week it's 40%. So 40% of the number of sites that are reporting have shown either a twofold increase or between a 0 and 1-fold doubling. And where is most of that happening? It's mostly in the Midwest. I mean, the vast majority of the reporting sites of increased viral loads in the wastewater are in the Midwest. And the dominant strain remains XBB 1.5. That's now 78. That's 73%, 78%. But remember, I told you last week XBB 1.6 was the new variant isolated in India, and that it was less than 1%, so it wasn't considered a variant of concern. In 1 week, it's gone from 1% to 7%. I mentioned last week I was pretty sure that one eventually would overtake. The only good news is it's only 3 amino acids different in the spike protein from XBB 1.5, and so it's so closely related. If you've been infected with the 1.5, as I was, I'm sure you'll be significant protection against the 1.16. But again, it speaks to the fact that we probably need a trivalent vaccine. So as we look back, there have been a couple of really interesting papers on things we can learn from the pandemic. I think the first and most important thing we learned was public health systems didn't really work, and that we didn't do a good job of surveillance relative to other countries, and we really need to do something. And I'm very proud. I mean, very proud of the state of Texas. Occasionally we do something right, but the last legislature funded something called the Texas Epidemic Public Health Institute. It's called TEPI. And this now nearing the end of its first year. And the goals of it are, as one of our viewers had suggested, is we really need to have all these different urban communities, all these communities have wastewater analysis. How do you link it? Well, this is how we link it. So Eric Barwinkle, who's the head of the UT Public Health School, applied for this grant. It was awarded by the state of Texas. And the idea is to onboard facilities in large Texas populations with the intent of covering over 80% of the state of Texas and in terms of looking at their wastewater. They would monitor wastewater for all known viral pathogens, report the levels of these viruses to public health officials in the community, and develop seasonal models. So this is really, I think, a great outcome of the pandemic. Now, the science behind it is with Baylor College of Medicine. So Dr. Moresso, who is leading the effort, and Baylor College of Medicine is leading the development of the innovative science to look at viral detection. And it is the only viral genome monitoring program that's at a statewide level in the nation. And on any given week, just to give you some examples, about 200 human viruses ranging from flu, SARS-CoV-2, monkeypox, hepatitis, RSV, enterovirus, HIV, norovirus, a number of other variants can be detected. And it's a really great idea, and the work is important because not only can we monitor all these human viruses, but we can then notify in advance the state and other officials. The only, I don't want to be negative, it's really good. The only thing we have to do is, if you recall, when SARS first came on board in the States, it came through, obviously, the coast. It came through New York and it came through Seattle. And somehow we need to connect with the other two coasts. While we're the third coast, we need to have connections there. So I'm hoping that this group will also reach out and try to connect with East Coast and West Coast communities. And then, of course, the other thing they haven't figured out is we need to report that up through the CDC and also connect. I know people get mad at the WHO, but it is the only global monitoring program. So there needs to be connections through the CDC and the WHO. But the three major groups involved are Tony Moresso, who runs our phage program. We interviewed him about a year ago. And then our new Pandemic Preparedness Center that's led by Dr. Piedra, Tony Piedra, and then the metagenomics team of Joe Petrosino. And it's a very cool idea. This is sort of a diagram of how it works. All these different wastewater programs go through samples. They're processed for molecular analysis. There's a very comprehensive detection. They can actually do further targeted sequencing if there's a particular variant or a particular virus of concern. They can validate it, do an analysis of its variants, and then the idea is then to communicate that upward through the health department of the state of Texas and create dashboards for communities to monitor. This is a really forward-thinking and great idea, but they do need to connect to the CDC. And I think we need to start collaborating with both coasts, because that's, it's interesting, RSV usually starts in the southeast and moves up, but a lot of the viruses come from Europe or China, or Asia. So we need to be able to figure out how to monitor the other coasts as well. And then there was one other really great study. This is by actual bioinformaticists type folks, and I think it was a great idea. They tried to model other ways of having indoor gatherings. So we all acknowledge that closing down was very difficult on the economy, very difficult on individuals. Closing schools was a problem. We had these giant super spreader events. So how can we do better next time? And so what they did was they looked at modeling airborne transmission of a group of people who were meeting at meetings, and how could you, if it was a gathering of some variety. And they looked at viral shedding of individuals based on data from COVID, the viral dynamics of the various venues in large setting, the group composition, making some assumptions, and then sort of how long the meeting would last and what they could do. And they came up with some very rational trade-offs. And basically what they found was that ventilation, which we knew, and taking time between, sort of having breaks so that the viral burden of the room can get lower, might be as effective as things like masking in the future. So I think very forward-thinking environmental study, and this is kind of the science that they looked at a group of people who were admixed, and that included people who were susceptible, people who were infected, people who tested negative, and then folks who had been infected and recovered, and they all get into a room, and you look at the viral dynamics based on some assumptions of the number of people infected. And what you can see is over time in a meeting room, the viral load that's in the air goes up and up and up continuously. And you can imagine in a large group setting, many people would be exposed to high viral burden. But when they broke it out every 20 minutes or so, or every 30 minutes, had a 15-minute break in between, the viral load of the room keeps dropping. And so based on that, they concluded that there were ways to get groups of people together and minimize exposure by having multiple smaller meetings rather than big meetings, and having opportunity sort of breaks in various times during the day, less than 50 minutes, so like every 30 minutes or so, have a break so that the room viral dynamics could reduce. And that was, I think that's the kind of thing we need to be thinking about now, rather than saying, well, we got to close all the schools. That's the kind of thing that would have been very helpful if we'd known in advance. So I want to end today with some shout-outs. First of all, we have a bunch of new McNair scholars. The Bob and Janice McNair Foundation supports many of our top scientists, and Dr. Barnett Duduk, Assistant Professor of Neurology, Dr. Benjamin Hayden, Professor of Neurosurgery, and Dr. Sarah Heilbronner, Assistant Professor of Neurosurgery, have all been named as McNair Scholars. And they focus on neuroscience research ranging from sort of decision-making and cognition to brain disease processes. So very grateful to the foundation for supporting them. I also mentioned last week, they're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the completion of the Human Genome Project, and we were a very big part of that. And there's going to be a symposium next week on Monday. That'll be a discussion of the advances that have been used that led to the current developments of genome research and the things that are making an impact on patient care. And then the last thing I want to do, because now it's, baseball season's coming up. As you know, many of the hospitals support some of the professional teams, support the Astros, support the Texans. Well, we're not to be outdone. So Baylor Medicine we have been the supporters of the Unicorn softball team of West Jew. Now, apparently, I've been getting a lot of requests of how are they doing. So I called the coach, and well, they're winning a lot, but that's not the objective. We're not allowed to talk about that. Everyone's having a good time. So I don't know when sports became a good time and no winning, but they're happy all the kids are having a good time. I'm happy they're winning a lot. Anyway, Lily's a big fan, and we're very excited about the West Jew softball team. So way to go, Unicorns. Anyway, have a great weekend, and I can't wait to see you next week.